Welcome to day 3 of Walking the Witch's Path. Today, as you can see, I'm inside. It's not a very nice day outside, so I decided to come home. And in case you're wondering, I do work full-time. I'm actually recording these on my lunch breaks. I lead a coven. We meet approximately twice a month. I teach 2 to 3 times a week, and I have a husband. So I am not saying that I am Superwoman, but it is with the help of the divine world, my patrons, and my inner plane teachers that I am able to have all of the energy that's needed to do these recordings and the writings and the teachings. This is part of the pledges that I have made to some of these deities in telling them that I am offering myself to a path of service. So, our talk today is, what is the divine world? The divine world encompasses everything that we offer up devotion to, that we see as being a part of ourselves. These include the goddesses, the gods, other plane beings, the elementals. These include a variety of different things. The path of the wise is crafted actually on devotion to the divine principles. So, in talking about those principles and what they are today, we're going to talk a little bit about the goddess and the god and the roles that they play in walking a witch's path. The craft of the wise and witchcraft itself is very strongly rooted in the divine feminine. The goddess is seen as the creatrix as well as the destroyer. She, in ancient times, also embodied those principles of life and death, of fertility within the harvest, of fertility within their communities. She was also equated with the phases of the moon themselves. Seeing the moon and its varying phases, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few moments, seeing those various phases, to the ancients, they were actually witnessing the divine feminine principle. The god embodies that aspect which is strength, which is also the willing sacrifice. The witch's wheel of the year includes the cycles of the god and goddess, and they become interwoven stories of life, death, rebirth again. The goddess is always at one point in time either a maiden, a mother, or a crone. The god is either the new birthed child or the consort or the sage who is willing to sacrifice himself so that the harvest and the wild and the animals may be protected as well. The god represents the divine masculine. He is the necessary polarized opposition that when you are talking about a union of the divine couple, the masculine and the feminine principle, and creation itself, we know that we need to have a womb that will create the environment for what will be newly birthed, but we also need to have the seed or the force or the energy that enters into that space, commingles with the feminine polarity or the feminine energy, and it is the combining and the union of the two that then creates something more, a third thing from itself. We can also equate the god, just as we have done with the goddess, with the lunar cycles, as being part and parcel of the solar cycles. In fact, in the craft, the sabbats, or the celebrations that occur during the Great Wheel of the Year, are sun or solar festivals. Not that they necessarily focus on the energy or the masculine principle, But these are the celebrations that give honor to what will flow in the cycle, one to the other, that provides the support, the strength, and the underpinnings of what will be newly birthed, as the goddess has some of those sabbats in her purview as well. The esbats are generally limited to the goddess herself in terms of the new moon, the full moon, and the dark moon being held in her domain, seeing the feminine principle as aligning with our intuitive nature, aligning with the healing properties, and also aligning with that fertility that is held within. Now, there are a few things that we could think about in terms of how we make our identification process when we are looking at what the divine world for us encompasses. We can definitely say that for a Wiccan path or the witch's path, monotheism versus polytheism are two of the things that we give concern to or attention to. Basically, a witch serves a polytheistic path. Monotheism is the honoring and the devotion of one singular God as a source of creation. We see this in most of the Christian belief system and also in some of the other more traditional religious practices. In Wicca and the witch's path, we follow, and in fact, for most pagans, we follow a polytheistic view, meaning that there are many gods and there are many goddesses within what we choose to offer our devotions to, what we choose to claim or call forth as our patrons. We follow a variety of different beings that represent different things, which brings me to anthropomorphic and archetypal energy. The anthropomorphic energy you could think of as all of those things that throughout time with deities and with the divine, the ancient peoples put on their gods and goddesses in a way that they assign them more human-like qualities, or at the very least, even if they weren't solely human-like in terms of superpowers and things like that, at least they did have qualities and they had an image that the ordinary human was able to relate to, versus just thinking of that divine energy as being a pure source of light or a stream of energy that didn't have any defined shape to it. So giving anthropomorphic qualities to these deities allowed for, and still does allow for us to interact with them in a way that, although we offer up devotion in a way that is much more than what our normal interactions with other human beings would be, it still allows us that key of access and seeing within them some of the qualities that we also find within ourselves. More importantly, it also gives us an inroad to seeing how the streams of the divine actually weave within our own being as well. The archetypal energies that we offer to these deity are those that are personality, and those are the things that narrow it down even further. The archetypes of deities who are warrior gods or goddesses, the archetypes that we give to even the planets within the zodiac, and many of the planets have been named for deities, and their energies are aligned with that. So we use both the anthropomorphic and the archetypal energy as ways of deepening our own personal connection to those things that we consider to be of non-corporeal essence and more rarefied and refined in their evolutionary process than perhaps we are. Another thing that we look at as well are the polarities. With a witch's path, we see both God and goddess. We know the need for both of them. So with that, we also acknowledge the polarity of masculine and feminine. Now, let me give some thought or give you something to think about as well. When I am speaking of polarities, the identifier of male and female is one that is more closely considered to be gender. Gender is part of a larger umbrella of things that are noted as being polarities. Polarities essentially are those things that are opposite of what something else is. And if we think of it in terms of perhaps electricity, polarities occur when you have a negative and a positive of something. And it's actually that space of neutrality, which is the third thing, which is the creation or the output of what the interaction between the negative and the positive thing produces. That is the place where the magic happens. So think of it this way. We have a negative energy and we have a positive energy. We place exposed wires in a pan of water. The wires carry an electrical charge, and in that pan of water, suddenly we have electricity, or we have a flash of light, or we have a burst of something that is the result of having two things that are opposite one another come together and produce a third. So within this path, we acknowledge the polarities of both the god and the goddess. We also use that energy in a way of bringing harmony and balance within ourselves to a place of union, meaning that we acknowledge that within ourselves we carry the masculine principle as well as the feminine. We carry the solar and the lunar energies within our being. We carry the positive and the negative energies within our being. We carry the strength and we carry the healing and the intuitive nature within our own being. So when we offer up our devotion to gods and goddesses that work in alignment with these streams, we are also calling into ourselves the balanced and harmonious product of what those polarities will be. Now, you will, in your readings perhaps, or when you go to ritual, or something that you may see online or in a video or read, that there are different designations that are used. Some of this is based on tradition as far as whether or not the god and goddess are called Lord and Lady. Some of it is just based on personal preference, but you may see the terms God and Goddess. You may see Lord and Lady. There is also another aspect of these gods and goddesses as well, and that is the triune nature of both aspects of those beings. So, with that being said, you also may note that for the feminine aspect or the goddess principle, you may see her separated out as maiden, mother, and crone. And for the masculine or God principle, you may see him separated out as youth, father, and sage. What this essentially does is, in taking the wholeness of what that energy is, it's now further refining it down, giving it another dimension of archetypal energy that can then be used in a slightly different way. Always being mindful, however, that it still is coming from the same stream and the same source. So how might these be used? The concept of the goddess as maiden, mother, crone is one that is very ancient, and it aligns perfectly with the celebration of the esbats or the lunar cycles. We see at the new moon the goddess in her form as the maiden. The maiden is exuberant energy. She is what will become the womb of potential. She is fresh She is beauty. She is all of those things that are at the very beginning of a cycle that will then mature into something else that is greater. The full moon is attributed to the mother. In this form, think of both the mother who is pregnant and just ready to give birth, as well as the mother who has already given birth and now moves into the stage of being the one who nurtures, the one who is the caregiver, the one who becomes, in a lot of aspects, the life source for that child or that creation, both during the time that the child is within and growing, as well as after the child's born, the mother instincts come into play. This is an aspect of maturity where there is also acknowledgement of great responsibility for those things that you either wish to bring to fruition in your life or those things that you wish to offer more fertility to and support. And then we have the last phase, which is the crone. The crone is associated with the dark moon. The crone has the experience of having been both the maiden and the mother in some form. The crone is the keeper of the wisdom, the deep mysteries. In the feminine cycle itself, the crone is also the one who has ceased the menstrual cycle. The blood is now held within. It is no longer offered out each month. It is no longer a place of fertile ground that will feed what perhaps wishes to be conceived within. The crone has the wisdom and the knowledge to know when to be silent, and also has the courage of knowing when to speak up and offer up the mandate that something must be released. The crone is also the intermediary point, knowing that soon her time will end. She is the keeper of death and the mysteries of death, and also the mysteries of what will flow in a never-ending cycle into her being reborn once again and moving into the phase of newness and the maiden. The cycles for the god, the youth, the father, and the sage are similar. The youth, however, is the exuberant energy that becomes the mate and the consort of the maiden herself. We could equate the youth as being in the solar cycle and the daily solar cycles as being the dawn. The youth is the sun that rises each morning, that sheds more light on what was held in the darkness, and also offers the promise of more light that will continue throughout the day. The father is noon. The father is the energy that, having come from the place of dawn, is now shining brightly and fully in the sky at the noontime hour. This is also the sun and the strength that, if you remain and linger too long out unprotected, will also burn you. So there is a component there to the father that, although there is a gentleness, there is also a sternness as well, that you must be mindful of what it is, how you are moving, and how long you stay in the brilliance of that light without it impacting you in a negative way. The sage, much like the crone, is the masculine energy that has now gathered to itself the wisdom of what the whole day preceding has led up to. The sage is that point at dusk where, for most of us, we begin to wind down. We know that the sun is still there and we are still feeling the light and the heat of its energy that has been gifted to us during the day. But we are now ready to relax. We are ready to settle in more deeply into the power and the authority that we have gathered into ourselves from the sunlight's energy. So we have this triune nature that is also folded into what we may experience as the energies of the divine, of the masculine and the feminine principle. When the two come together and when the two are used in companionship with one another, they do become each other's consorts, in the case of the maiden and the youth, each one needed in order to produce a state of fertility that has the potential for actually creating something in the manifest world. And that's not necessarily just in a biological sense. We use this energy as well whenever we give birth to anything that is creative, a new piece of writing, a new way of doing something, and something that we share with other people. We are actually using that youth and that maiden energy to come together to produce something else. We use the energy of the mother and the father, the responsibility, the care, the gentle authority, every time we step into our place of power. We use the energy and the wisdom of the sage and the crone every time we make a decision that is born from our past experiences, that we have arrived at this place through careful thought, through careful intention, through processing it through our emotional landscape, and arriving at a solution or a conclusion that is actually based on what we have carried forward from all of our experiences from that stage of youth and maiden, mother and father, and now being comfortable in the knowledge also that whatever our decision is will eventually fade and move away and be transformed as the cycle begins anew, in birthing something new, as we begin that cycle of maiden and youth once again. Pantheons. This is something that I'm often asked about, especially with those who are new to this particular path. There are many pantheons of gods and goddesses. Almost every culture has had a group of deities in their ancient pre-Christian times, and even now in the Christian times, and in more formalized religion. They too have a deity or an aspect of that deity. Pantheons are culturally based, meaning that some of the more prominent ones in this path that you will come across are the Celtic pantheon, the Egyptian pantheon, the Norse pantheon, and the Greek pantheon. If nothing else, when we were in school and we were studying the ancient peoples, we may have learned a little bit about each of those pantheons in terms of the gods and goddesses that they worshiped at those times. Those are just to name a few. Now, there are also deities that align with a Russian pantheon, an Italian pantheon, the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, the Native Americans, the Aztecs. The list goes on and on and on. If you follow an Eastern practice as well, the Indian or Hindu pantheon is vast in the number of deities that they have that they use. The Tibetan pantheon, the deities and the energies that they use as well. The Japanese, it goes on and on and on. My suggestion in most cases to those who are newly walking the path, as a way of perhaps seeking out what ultimately or eventually you're hoping will become your patrons, is to begin with those deities that are within the pantheon that is most strongly represented within your own cultural and ethnic background. Meaning that if you are of Celtic descent, I would definitely look into those deities first. If you are of Latin American descent, look into those deities. If you are of African descent, look into those deities, and so on and so forth. I'm not suggesting that that's where your hat's going to land in terms of what your practice will look like. But what I am suggesting is that encoded within ourselves, beyond the genealogy, There is a history and there is an inner knowing and knowledge that we already have, simply because our ancestors were part and parcel of that cultural experience that helped to develop the thought forms that then later became the deities. So that's one way that you can go about this. Another way is to just simply go with wherever and with whomever you feel the most alignment. This is where the archetypal and the anthropomorphic overlays to these deities will often help you make a more informed decision. If you feel, for instance, that you are lacking in your own physical experience in your daily life, an amount of courage and strength that you would like to have, then perhaps look at some of the deities that are more active, that are perhaps even warrior gods or goddesses, that you may draw from their lessons and from their mythologies the energies that you may find within yourself that need just a bit more bolstering. If you are someone who is very deeply engaged in the healing arts and very much wishes to be of help and assistance to others in humanity, then look into some of those deities that have a very strong healing component as part and parcel of what their energy is. Those may be the deities that you wish to work with as well. If you're looking for someone or a muse, I guess I could use that phrase for it, to stimulate your creative energies, then perhaps look into some of those deities who are noted for being poets and smiths and creators and artists and musicians and dancers. Some of those deities may actually be the ones that you will find and be able to draw on the resonance within them that can also resonate within you. So, patrons. The topic of patrons is something that also comes up quite often. You will hear varying forms of what a patron is for a particular individual. In some cases, you may be told that a patron showed up on their door, a deity literally knocked on their door, well, not literally, but knocked on their spiritual essence, let's put it that way, and said, I am claiming you as my priest or my priestess. That may be one way of experiencing it. Or another way is that you can actively seek out a patron yourself. The thing that I would say to anyone regarding a patron, meaning that this is a deity to whom you have either pledged your service or has chosen you to do their work, is to question them. We tend to think that because these are divine beings, that we have no right to question. And quite frankly, often it comes down to the basics of just being so overly flattered that this big deity would choose me to do their work, that we forget the very basics of any interaction that we are entering into. There is a specific contract that is being made when you choose a patron and when a patron chooses you, and there is an agreement between the two of you that the way the work will proceed is going to be in the best and highest interest for both of you. One thing that you have to remember is that every patron that may show up that is canvassing you to become their devotee, or however you wish to consider yourself, is not necessarily who they say they are. This is not that there's malevolent intent. That's not what I'm saying at all. But generally, we have to really remember that these gods and goddesses are huge and vast in their presence. They are interested in humans occasionally, but we are not first and foremost their primary interest. So with that being said, what that means is there are also a whole host of other beings who are indeed very interested in working with us. And sometimes they will mask themselves in the cloak or the anthropomorphic image or the archetype of who we think that who they think we want them to be. There's not necessarily a malevolent intent with this. It's more like, hey, look at me. I want you to work with me, and I want you to see me in a certain way. So the reason I am suggesting what I am suggesting as far as asking and testing is because if it is truly the deity that they are saying they are, and if they truly do want to work with you or help you in some way, or have you actually help them, because remember, these are non-corporeal beings. So what we have as human beings, they do desire at times to do their work. So by asking them who they are, and then asking them to prove who they are to you by doing a simple task or two that you may ask them to do, is not in any way being disrespectful to that deity. In fact, if they are indeed who they say they are, they will come through and they will do what you have asked them to do. And then that is when the agreement is set up between you and them as to where it will proceed, if at all, from there. This was a piece of advice that I received from one of our elders in our tradition many, many years ago, that he always tells people, because giving up your own personal time, and more importantly, giving up your spiritual energy to doing the work and thinking that you're doing this work for a specific being who is not who they say they are, is really something that is not good or beneficial for you or for them, or more importantly, for the work that you're trying to do. Devotion is another thing that we bring into the mix when we are working with the divine world. What that devotion looks like. Later on, during these days, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about spiritual practice, which naturally falls and organically flows into offering up devotion and what that looks like to the deities that you work with. But any divine being that you are working with, there are ways that you can interact with them, or ways that you can also call to them and get their attention. Invocation is one. Writing something in ritual that is specific, that is calling to all the archetypal energies that encompass who and what that being is one way. Sitting quietly in meditative practice and perhaps bringing into the space something that in their mythology you have read is sacred to them, a flower, a food, a scent, anything, a color, is another way of offering up devotion to these beings. And remember that when you are engaging routinely or wish to engage regularly with any of these divine beings, just as you wouldn't go long periods of time without checking in and just seeing how someone you care about or someone you love is, also these deities expect that if you are going to establish a relationship with them, that there will be some sort of regular contact with them. It can be as simple as just taking some time, 5 minutes during your day, to be thinking about and offer up a special prayer, offering, or affirmation that is in honor of this particular deity. So I hope these things have given you a few things to think about when you're thinking or looking or seeking for those who inhabit the divine world. As we move through the process of walking this path, and we are becoming more aware of what surrounds us, and we started that process yesterday in communing in the natural world, you will find that opportunities will present themselves readily and easy to access for you to explore more about those deities who may be something or someone's that you can use a bit more of that energy into your own life. As we say, like attracts like. So one of the first things I would say is that to acknowledge ourselves as being part of that divine family is one of the ways to set up the electromagnetic beacon that will then attract to yourself those beings in the divine realm who most closely resemble or resonate with that energy. Conversely, you will also attract those beings and those energies that perhaps you need a bit more of. There's a saying in the psychological venue that people that we dislike strongly, the reason we dislike them is because we see the traits in them that are those traits we consider to be undesirable in ourselves. So sometimes you may actually be seeking and searching, and the divine energy that presents itself might be something that you feel, that's definitely not me, that's not what I want to be, that's not who I am. Just take a moment to breathe. Take a moment to pause, and take a moment to look a little bit deeply, not at them, but actually at yourself. Because one of the other things that is strongly encouraged within this practice and within this path is a saying that was inscribed over the archway of the Oracle of Delphi, which essentially means know thyself. The more that you know about yourself, the more your interactions with the divine world will unfold in a path and a pattern that will support all of your endeavors. So until I see you tomorrow, I hope you have a blessed rest of the day. And may the divine always be within you and always surrounding you to be of assistance and help. Blessed be.